Phones are an incredibly powerful tool. They can connect us with friends, help us organise our lives, and actually just be a great source of entertainment. Recently, I've been feeling that something that was a tool to keep me in touch with the world is actually turning into the opposite. It's something that's constantly pulling me out of conversations with friends or even just a pleasant moment alone. I decided to rethink how my phone works from the ground up so it can be a tool that works for me and not the other way around. In this video, first I'm going to talk how you can set up general principles to then guide the setup of your phone. Then I'm going to talk about how to organize apps using choice architecture, basically a fancy word to make the apps that you want to use easy to use and the ones that you don't want to use hard to use. Then we'll talk about my background image and how you can set up your own to just make phone use a little bit more intentional. Finally, we're going to talk through some other little tweaks such as using grayscale and minimizing notifications just to make your phone a little bit less enticing to use when you're feeling bored. So yeah, let's dive in. Let me ask you a question. Why do you own a phone? Kind of sounds like a bit of a ridiculous question, right? If you ask your friends, or if I ask my friends, most common answer I get is, Tom, mate, it's the 21st century, I need to own a phone. Sort of that is an answer, but also it's not really at all. And if you don't know yourself how you're going to use a phone, then someone else is going to decide for you. Whether that's Instagram hooking you in with its infinite feed, or whether it's Twitter bombarding you with 1,000 notifications a day. This is why I think it's really beneficial for everyone to just spend 5 minutes thinking about why they own this device, and then that's going to really help you guide setting up your phone in a way that is aligned with these principles. Here's my list. Firstly, I have creation over consumption. What this means is I don't want to be constantly scrolling through my phone, consuming information. While there's definitely a time and a place for that, I don't find it as satisfying as something like creating a YouTube video or writing a blog post. Secondly, I've got maintaining relationships. I'm not actually of the opinion that you can grow relationships through phones. I'm sure that all the 16-year-olds out there are going to be hating in the comments, but that's just my personal opinion and something that I'd like my phone to be able to do for me. Thirdly, I want my phone to take stress out of my life. Google Calendar, Uber, Maps, these are all incredible applications that just make life that little bit simpler. Finally, the last one is I want to feel like I'm controlling the phone and the phone isn't controlling me. Obviously, these principles are going to be different for everybody. You're going to have your own set of ideas about why you have a phone, but fundamentally, this is going to really help guiding how you're going to set it up. Let's talk about apps. Apps are the backbone of any smartphone. Without them, they'd be pretty useless. Here's how I organize my apps. The general idea is that you want to make apps that you want to use easy to access and the ones you don't want to use as much harder to access. This concept is called choice architecture, and I think it was actually coined by Richard Thaler in his book called Nudge. I'd highly recommend that you check that out if sort of designing things in certain ways to make the right decision or the correct decision easier is something that interests you. A really memorable example in that book that stands out is they took an experiment with different schools, and just by positioning fruit in different areas of the canteen, they actually managed to significantly increase the fruit intake and decrease the intake of desserts in those particular schools. And that's sort of what we're doing with the apps here, making the apps that we want to eat, metaphorically, easy to access, and the ones that we don't want to consume are just a little bit harder. On my phone, I have just 4 apps on the home screen. The first one is the phone app. This is just because I want to be prompted to go and call my friends, especially while we're living in lockdown at the moment. It's very easy to fall out of touch with people, so just having that on the home page really makes sense for me. The second app that I have is called Freedom. It's a really basic app but works really well. It's just a timer, and what happens is as you initiate the timer, a tree starts growing. So it's just really cool for me to have that as a go-to, so that the sort of default is to open up Freedom and start doing some deep work through the timer. The third app that I have down there is Notion. This is just basically the app that I use to organise everything in my life, from the script for this video to where I'm going on holiday next month. It's a really useful application, and if you haven't checked it out, I'd highly recommend it. Finally, I have my calendar. I'm incredibly disorganised, so having this in place really helps, just to make sure that I don't forget important meetings or anything like that. The rest of the apps I keep in a folder on the second page, so I'm actually forced to use the spotlight search if I want to find any app that isn't on my home screen. You'd really be surprised how adding this little bit of extra friction will really help you become more intentional with your app use. The elephant in the room is obviously this background image. The idea here is that actually when you're using your phone, sort of quite a lot of it is subconscious. So you might be feeling anxious, you might be feeling bored. The intrinsic motivation is to pull up your phone, go on Twitter, go on Instagram, and escape that feeling. So all this image really does is serve as a reminder that I have actually opened up my phone, and I decided to draw just a little picture of myself in the future with this weird sort of judgy look on his face, with the little text just saying, "Why you here, boy?" For some reason in my head he's got a deep South American accent. I don't know how that's been developed, but yeah, I do find that this little image really does just help jolt me into a conscious state when I'm using my phone. If you don't fancy doing a drawing, anything can work here. Grab a photo of Google Images and just put some text over it. Really just anything that's going to help you just get out of that subconscious state and into a conscious, I am here, I'm on my phone, this is what I'm going to do. You'll also notice that the phone is completely grayed out on iPhone. This is a setting called grayscale. I actually really struggled with using grayscale in the past. I tried to put it on and then I'll just end up watching a YouTube marathon in bed, which nothing wrong with that, and then never turning it back on again. But I actually found a really good hack that makes me use grayscale probably 90% of the time. What you want to do is go into settings, go into general, and then accessibility, and then in display accommodations you're going to see color filters. Switch color filters on to turn your grayscale on. And now, just with 3 clicks of the home button, you can actually switch between grayscale and color, which is really helpful because, if you're doing something where you actually need to be interacting with the color, you can easily switch that on. But then when you just want your phone to be a little bit less distracting, you can just put it back into grayscale. Notifications are perhaps the most invasive thing about smartphones. I found the best way was to just turn them all off and then start turning them back on when you start to miss them. So for example, now I have WhatsApp notifications enabled, I have Google Calendar enabled, and a couple of others. You'll find out what works for you, but basically the idea is get rid of them all, decide which ones you miss, and then you're only going to have the absolute essential. Thanks a lot for sticking around to the end of the video. Really, I actually just think the most important thing is sitting down for 5 minutes and coming up with 3 or 4 reasons as to why you have a phone. And then if you have that information from there, sort of applying these principles of choice architecture and lowering distractions, you can actually set up your phone in any way that you want with those principles in mind. Thanks again. If you have any questions, put them in the comments section. Because this is my first video, I'm obviously probably going to have about 10 views, so you can be pretty much guaranteed that I'm going to give you an answer. So yeah, thanks a lot.